as my machine starts, it's fine. It keeps going and going, and it starts throwing stones. What would cause this?
What can cause stones to throw is actually a clog in the gun nozzle tip here, in the setter gun. It could be also the relationship between my alignment between the guns, so we want to check that. Also, the speed at which this gun comes up to take the stone. You got to remember that when this gun is coming up to take the stone off the top gun nozzle, this is releasing the stone. So if this is slow to come up, what will happen is the stone will drop off the gun nozzle before this has gotten a chance to take it. And the stone just bounces off the gun nozzle tip and lands somewhere in my transfer sheet. Now, if stones are thrown clear off the transfer sheet, then we have another issue, okay, besides alignment. But what we want to do is we want to check the speed of this gun. So again, what I do is I go to my output menu and I arrow over to the dot underneath the number 3. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate my bottom gun to the right here, okay? And I'm going to watch the speed at which that comes out. If this is slow to come out, then it's possible that you failed to maintenance your bottom gun. So you'd want to actually take this apart, clean and lubricate it as shown in the maintenance section. Okay? If that's not the case, then it's possible that the alignment is off. If this is not aligned up perfectly, what will happen, it'll clip the stone off the top gun, dropping it on the left-hand side. Or if it's aligned this way improperly, it'll clip the stone on this side, dropping the stone to the right. So what you want to do in that situation to check is you want to go to your system menu, go to swing and hit set 2 times, hit escape once, go to your spin, hit set twice. And now what I'll do is I'll use the up arrow button to bring the gun up to the gun and check my alignment. Use your arrow buttons to adjust your positioning of that bottom gun. You also want to look through the right hand window of the machine and check your alignment front to back, making sure that the gun is properly centered front to back. And in this situation, this gun is pretty good. If it was loose, then what you would have to do is on the front side of this machine, if you look how this gun is mounted to the motor, here's the motor right here. There's 2 Allen screws, one on each other. Loosen those up with your 2mm Allen wrench. Hold on. And while the gun is lifted, you could slide this component in or out until it lines up with the bottom, with the top gun. Tighten those screws up and you're good. Now, if the stones are thrown completely off the transfer sheet, then you have to note which direction is the stone throwing. For instance, if I'm working out of the left hopper and my stones are throwing to the right, it could only be something attributed to the bottom gun, because this gun is always moving left. This gun always moves towards the right to place my stones. So the stones are probably being thrown from the bottom gun. So what you want to do is actually test and see if you have a clog in there. Normally, let's say your issue was it lays SS6 stones fine, but as soon as it goes to a heavier, like an SS10, SS16 stone, it throws them. It would be because I have a lack of vacuum in that gun nozzle. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is check for a clog. To do that, disconnect both these vacuum tubes. Your vacuum tubes are always the tubes that are closest to the gun nozzles. For instance, the swing gun's vacuum tube would be connected to this fitting here. Disconnect that one and disconnect the one for the bottom. What we're going to use is the vacuum sensor as a barometer to check what the airflow value is through this bottom gun. If you remember in a previous video where we were checking for clogs in the top gun, we went to output and we went over to the last dot on the right underneath the number 0, and we can see that we have a value of 24.8 shown on our vacuum sensor here. And if we had a clog, that number would be higher. So the same holds true if we use this tube, which is directly connected to this, and stick it into the fitting of our bottom gun. We can now test the airflow through the bottom gun's nozzle tip. Now, the size of this nozzle tip is actually smaller than this one. On this one here, we're reading a value of 26. We will read a value of 30 or 40 on the bottom gun. Actually, we're reading 29. So a little bit higher than we're seeing because the nozzle tip is smaller. Now, of course, if your airflow rate is higher than that basic number, normally your rate will be anywhere from 52.0 or lower. Okay? If you're higher than that, then your gun nozzle tip is clogged here. And what's happening is, as the vacuum turns on and off, that little particulate is changing its position in the gun nozzle, closing off more vacuum at some times, opening up and allowing air to handle vacuum better. So it depends on how it's turning on, and that particulate's changing its position. So to clean that, what we need to do is we need to take this take our 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench cut. Okay, now whenever you're removing these fittings, you do not want to grab them with a pair of pliers and remove them because you'll break it. Instead, they're hex shaped inside. So grab your 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench, stick it inside the fitting, and you can unscrew it easily from the gun. Then I'll take my small little paper clip, and you want to go through that gun nozzle tip until it actually, let me find it. Cut. And what you want to do is go through that gun nozzle tip with your paper clip. Now, it is cone shaped, so you want to work in a circular motion to make sure you get all the clog out. So when I push it down, you can see that I'm kind of working all the way around it, making sure it's nice and unclogged. Now, what I want to do is blow that out. I don't want to draw that vacuum back in further. So what I'll do is I'll cheat a little bit. I'm going to use system air to blow that out. The largest tube on your machine is this bottom one. Disconnect it from both fittings. Okay? This fitting over here, disconnect this tube from this fitting and insert one end of this long tube into here. And now this I'll use as air pressure. I will set this right on the nozzle tip, and I'll turn on output number 2 on my control panel. I'll put right on there, and then what I'll do is I'll pulse it, watch. Now you can see I'm blowing out the gun. When I'm done, disconnect this tube, reattach it right back to where it was. Put your fitting back on. And then reattach this top tube back into it and get it and check your reading again. That'll be on output number 0. And see if that number drops. Once that number drops, you know you've gotten your clog. Put your tubes back to the way they were. This one goes here, and this one goes here. If the problem is still occurring, then what you want to do is actually test the solenoid's ability to turn on and turn off time. On this machine you have 4 solenoids, 2 for each gun. One solenoid is busy moving this gun up and down through these 2 tubes. The other solenoid is for creating a vacuum on here and turning it off. You have another solenoid for the bottom gun, which is pushing that gun up and down, and another solenoid which actually provides vacuum to that bottom gun. These solenoids fire at 30 millisecond intervals. For instance, when this gun comes up to pick up a stone, I have 3 solenoids coming on at the same time. I have the vacuum solenoid for the top gun holding the stone onto the top gun. Another solenoid which is firing this gun in the up position. At the same time, another solenoid is turning the vacuum on for this bottom gun. And if one of those solenoids is out of timing because of some corruptive measure that got into it, it will change how my machine is exchanging stones or placing stones. For instance, if let's say for chance that my stones are thrown to the left, it would only be the top gun. The issue would be isolated to the top gun because this is the only gun that moves to the left. Let's say for some reason my stones are throwing to the left. Then it's most likely the solenoid which controls the vacuum of this top gun. What will happen is, if it becomes out of time, the gun will move over, go down, and then it'll grab the stone with the vacuum. And when it gets to this point to exchange the stone to the bottom gun, it never cuts off. It doesn't cut off in time to exchange the stone to the bottom gun, so it still has it. This is rotating like it thinks it has a stone, and this is moving to grab the next stone. At the meantime, the solenoid then shuts off, throwing the stone to the left. So it's a mistiming. Now we can prove this. Number one, if your machine starts off after it's been shut off for a while and it places stones correctly, and as it works, it starts to throw the stones, that's indicative of a solenoid timing issue, okay? If the machine constantly throws this larger stones but lays smaller stones fine, then it's usually a clog somewhere. So that's how you can differentiate what you're looking for. To test to see if the solenoids are the problem, is what you want to do is you want to go into the system. And what we're going to do is slow the machine speed down by going to parameter settings. And we'll choose, let's say we're running SS6 stones right now in this design. We'll go into SS6, and we're going to change the timing signature. This 3 means 30. That's a 30, that's 30. That means the vacuum is coming on within 30 milliseconds when the gun gets to over to the hopper, and it's coming down. It takes 30 milliseconds for that gun to come all the way down. So we want the vacuum to come on full strength within 30 milliseconds. The number 2, EX, means exchange. It means we want the bottom gun to turn on its vacuum as it's lifting up to take the stone from the top gun. Okay, that also is 30 milliseconds. And this is the release of the stone to the transfer sheet. Okay, so what I'm going to do is slow this machine down by using my up arrow button, and I'll set these numbers to 10. I'll go to exchange and set it to 10, and ST and set it to 10. Don't worry about SW or SP, okay? They have nothing to do with this test. Escape out of the menu and run the machine. If the stones are no longer throwing, then you define the culprit as being a solenoid. The solenoid actually needs to be replaced. What happens is microparticle over time will get into the solenoid and actually slow down how that solenoid creates air pressure to the different components, okay? Solenoids do need to be replaced. If you're treating the air, in other words, you're controlling oil, moisture, and microparticles like dust out of the air that's being used by the air compressor, then we can get about 2 to 3 years of life out of a normal solenoid. If you're not treating your air, then the solenoid's life can last you up to 6 months before it shows signs of wear, and then you're throwing stones. So always want to treat your air. But a normal treated solenoid will last you 2 to 3 years, so you want to have some on hand. In the next part of this video, we're going to show you how to remove the shell of the machine and then replace the solenoids. Once the shell is removed from the machine, we have the solenoid block exposed. Now you do have a little control panel right here, and to get this out of the way, what you want to do is this Phillips screw, just loosen it up, push this forward, and put the screw back in the hole, and then this will hold it straight back, and then you have full access to it. Now, as you can see, we have 4 solenoids. Each solenoid, as we mentioned earlier, does a certain function on one of our guns. For instance, this solenoid here is responsible for pushing, lifting and lowering the top gun, our swing gun. This solenoid here operates the vacuum turning on and turning off for the top gun. This one here operates the bottom gun's up and down motion, and this solenoid here operates the vacuum for the bottom gun. So usually what we want to do is replace these solenoids if we know that they're bad. By slowing down the machine, if the machine places stones properly, then we know we have a solenoid. The solenoids cannot open and close with the current speed of the machine. So by slowing the machine down, we match how deficient the solenoid is responding. Now, another way you can tell if your solenoids are bad is by looking at these 2 filters that are in the front here. These are called your silencers. And the left one pushes air that is trapped in the manifold out, so the trapped air doesn't fight against what the solenoids are trying to do. This one here is whenever vacuum turns on and off, that has more air pressure pushing out than normal up and down motion of the gun. So this one usually will turn yellower than the right one. So if they really look bad, then you know that it's time to change out these solenoids. Now, to change them out, the first thing we want to do is we have a series of tubes going through fittings on the side here, okay? And as you can see, I flag each tube so I know where they go, because I have to disconnect these. This one here, we have 4 solenoids, 1, 2, 3, 4 top and 4 bottom. So I labeled this one 4T, and the bottom one 4B, 4 top and 4 bottom. The next one is labeled number 3, because it goes into the 3rd slot, number 2, and then number 1. So what you want to do is disconnect these tubes after you flag them so you know where they go when you're finished. Now, over on the left-hand side here, we have our electrical connections. Simply just pinch them and pull them off. If you want to make sure that these do not change their positions. Sometimes I will flag these 1, 2, 3, and 4 as well. just so I know which solenoid they go to. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to remove the solenoid block from our machine, and for that you'll need a 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench, and there's a black Allen screw here, which will loosen. And then there's one in the front here. So now we'll pull those screws out. Now what we need to do is we do not want to just put brand new solenoids on a manifold that has oil. We want to clean the manifold of any resident oil before putting the new solenoids on. Otherwise the new solenoids will just take on that old oil and then become corrupt right off the bat. You'll probably get about 6 months to a year out of them, and then they fail again. You got to replace them again. So you want to make sure that you clean these completely before putting new solenoids on. Disconnect the tube here, and there it is. Okay, so we'll go over to the video. The tools we need to do, we want to actually strip this solenoid completely out, take all the parts off of it. So the tools we'll need is an adjustable wrench, a small screwdriver, not a large one, you want a very fine tip there, a 6 millimeter Allen wrench, and a 2 millimeter Allen wrench. So the first thing I'll do is actually remove my solenoids, okay? You can see that there's 2 screws, one on each side. So I'll go ahead and unscrew this one, unscrew this one, and you can cut. Okay, after they're all unscrewed, you want to remove these off the manifold, and you'll probably see some evidence of deposited oil here. The next thing we want to do is, on the sides we have these fittings and we have these plugs, okay? I want to know exactly where my fittings go, so I'll take my screwdriver and I'll put a little score where all the plugs go on this manifold. So there we have another 6 millimeter plug here, so I'll score that. And then on this side, we have 2. So I'm going to score this one and score that one. Now I know where my plugs go, and everything else is fittings. So now we'll take our crescent wrench and we'll remove this one here. Take my 2.5 or my 2 millimeter, stick it inside each of these fittings and unscrew them. And now we'll remove the plugs, and this is a 2.5 millimeter. Now these will have washers on. You see the little plastic white washers? Don't lose those. They make sure there's no air leaks once we put this together again. Remove this one. Over here we have 6 millimeter plugs. Pull these out. Now, on the side of each one of these screws, they put a compound. If the compound's worn away, then you want to wrap this with white Teflon tape, just one layer around before you put it back in. There we go, that one comes off. And then we have the silencers. Now the silencers just unscrew with your fingers. If they're really bad in discoloration, you want to replace these. And then we take our last plug off, which also has a white ring to it. And now my manifold is completely stripped dry. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to dip this in isopropyl alcohol, 70%. Leave it in there. The isopropyl alcohol is going to get into all these holes and break down any oil deposits and dirt deposits. I leave it in there for about 20 minutes, and then I'll go with a large Q-tip and then clean out. Now you can get the large Q-tips that have the wooden handles to it, to go all the way through these holes and clean out all the oil deposit. Once you do that, dip it in there again for about 10 minutes, pull it out, and wring it out. Make sure it's nice and dry. You can use air compressor to actually blow the air out, but you want to make sure this is completely dry before putting it back together. Even if you leave it out overnight, in the morning it'll be completely dry and you can reassemble it. Now what I'll do is, to reassemble it, I'll look to find out where all my plugs go, and you can see where I put my score marks. So I'm going to start putting my plugs in first.